Hello! So Shakespeare in Macbeth is really interested in the idea of self-determination. Self-determination means that you can determine your own fate. In other words, you have free will and what happens to you depends on your choices in life and you can make those choices freely. However, a much more ancient belief is in fate. When you are fated, certain events in your life must happen, but you are still allowed some free will in how you react to things and the choices that you make. Whatever choices you make, you can't choose the important events such as your death, but you can choose how you respond to things that happen around you. Now, what interests Shakespeare about this is the rise of the new middle class. And he is one of those. Shakespeare should never have been, if we just looked at fate, as popular as he was. The idea of becoming a playwright and setting up a theatre didn't exist at the time Shakespeare was born. These things simply didn't exist at all. It's like your generation has not been alive without the internet, but my generation has. The internet just didn't exist, and suddenly the whole world changed. So for a man like Shakespeare, who becomes fantastically successful in his own lifetime and really wealthy, if you visit his house in Stratford, well, it's no longer there, but you can see it's right in the centre. He's become the richest person in Stratford, really. And that's all through his own efforts, all through his own plays, his own free will. But he writes a play about Macbeth, who appears to think he has free will, but actually also at the same time appears to the audience to be controlled by fate. Now the fates in mythology, Greek mythology and then later Roman mythology, are represented by three women, and they usually are a young virgin, a mature woman and an old crone. And many commentators see the fates as being a far older belief linked to earlier pagan beliefs about the moon. So the virgin is the new moon, and then the mature woman is the full moon, and the crone is the moon at the end of the month. Well, okay, deeply fascinating, Mr. Salles, but what does this have to do with Macbeth? Well, in Norse mythology, the mythology followed by the Vikings, these three women, the Fates, were called the Weird Sisters. And now suddenly we have the link to the witches. And Shakespeare is asking the question, is Macbeth's tragedy controlled entirely by the witches? Well, now that he's posed the question to us in that way, let's look at these 8 quotations that have to do with fate. So our first encounter that Macbeth has with the witches is where they say to him, "All hail Macbeth, hail to thee, Thane of Cawdor." So this shows that they have knowledge of him, but that's not yet a prophecy. It's not saying into the future. "All hail Macbeth, thou shalt be king hereafter." Well, now it is prophecy. And so the Fates had the gift of prophecy. They could obviously see into the future. Something really interesting is going on here that you might not know about. The word thou we think of as quite formal because we no longer say that, we say you. But in Shakespeare's day, you was formal, thou was intimate, is what you would say to a friend. And so the Fates here, in the form of the three witches, are actually speaking to Macbeth as though they're already intimate with him. They're already his friend. And as friends, they're offering him this prophecy that he's going to become the king. So that gives us an inkling as to why he's so keen to accept what they say is true. Because it's as though they already know him. They're already intimate with him and with his desires. He is, of course, a bit suspicious of this. So we get to quotation number 3 when he's on his own and he says aside, "If chance will have me king, why chance may crown me without my stir." Now, he uses the word chance here to distance himself from fate. Fate means it's inevitable. Chance has that element of inevitability, but it also suggests the possibility of free will. He doesn't have to do anything, which is why we get this repetition of me and the possessive my. He's focusing on his own choice here. This is the moment in the play when the tragedy could have been averted, because he could simply wait and just see if this prophecy comes true, and he could become king in the natural course of events. Yes, Malcolm is due to become king after Duncan, but there's no health service in these days. People died all the time. There's no penicillin. There's nothing to keep you alive if you get injured other than pure luck. People died young all the time. However, the Fates and the Weird Sisters don't just work on Macbeth's minds, they also work on Banquo's. And so they say to Banquo, "Thou shalt get kings," meaning beget, the old name for giving birth to or being the father of. So you'll be the father of kings, though thou be none. And once the witches introduce this idea, Macbeth sees another obstacle. Well, if I'm going to become king, what's going to happen to make Banquo's sons kings? Now, in the natural course of events, it might be that Macbeth never has any sons himself, and he chooses Banquo's line because Banquo is his best friend, and decides that Fleance should become king. So that would fit very well with the idea of just waiting to see what happens and waiting for chance. But at the same time, they plant this seed that in order to stay king, Macbeth's going to need to get rid of Banquo and thereby get rid of Banquo's sons. Now this links us back to the third fate, the one who is normally depicted as a hard-faced old crone, because she's the one who cuts the thread of life. There she is holding her shears, and there's the thread which she's going to cut, representing person's life. And it is her hardness which is reflected in this idea that the kingship will not be long-lived. He'll have to give it over to Banquo's sons. Now, if we move forward in the play, once Macbeth has become king, he is now obsessed with whether he's going to lose his kingship. He returns to the witches, the Weird Sisters, who we know could represent fate, and they lie to him in a way. They say to him, "Macbeth shall never vanquished be until great Birnam Wood to high Dunsinane Hill shall come against him." Well, we know the wood never actually does come up the hill, but it appears to come up the hill because the invading army with Malcolm chop down the branches of trees and hold them up in front like a giant screen, so that the defenders in the castle can't see how many men are behind this screen, and therefore they don't know which side of the castle to defend most. The part that you would want to defend is where the largest attack is going to come from, but they wouldn't be able to see this. So when we examine this kind of prophecy, if you like, from the witches, Shakespeare's really asking us, is fate an illusion? Just like Birnam Wood moving up the hill is an illusion. And actually, are we much more determined by our own free will? And your answer to that question will really depend on how you look at your life. So if we look at Shakespeare's life, we've got this extraordinary success story, which he would naturally be able to see as entirely down to his own efforts and his own talents. And his talent is evident everywhere in the form of his plays. He's not thinking of them as some sort of high art and culture as we're taught to do now. He's thinking of them as money-making machines. He puts on these incredible entertainments that people flock to see, and he becomes rich. So you could imagine that he would be predisposed to think that this was because of his own efforts rather than some supernatural fate controlling what happens to him. On the other hand, King James is in the opposite position. King James wants to show that he deserves to be king because God has ordained it. Now, the problem with this is that Queen Elizabeth I has died without a son or a daughter to follow her, and therefore there's political negotiation about who should be next in line. Many people are deeply unhappy that it's King James. So, from his perspective, fate is absolutely necessary, because fate says to everyone in the kingdom, look, King James is destined to be king. He's God's choice, and you would have seen that in my video, The Divine Right of Kings. So Shakespeare's attitude to fate is the exact opposite of King James's, which makes this conflict really interesting in the play. So if we go a little deeper, they next tell Macbeth to beware Macduff. And Macduff is the person who actually turns out to kill him, and therefore we can see that as fate. However, Macduff's desire to kill Macbeth is actually the result of Macbeth's free will. So this becomes deeply ironic, and Shakespeare is asking, actually, are our fates determined by the choices that we make? Our next prophecy is that no man born of woman shall kill Macbeth. And as you know, Macduff says, despair thy charm, for Macduff was from his mother's womb untimely ripped. In other words, he is the result of a caesarean section. Now again, this is a cheat. So Shakespeare could be suggesting that fate is an illusion, it's not real, because obviously Macduff was born from a woman, even if it was by caesarean section. His mother wasn't a horse or a dog or a cow, it was a female human being. There's no other way to describe her other than a woman. So this is an interesting kind of cheat here. But at this moment, Macbeth gives up, doesn't he? He refuses to fight, and then Macduff tells him that he's going to be paraded in the streets as an object of show and scorn, and Macbeth then decides that he will fight and die. So at this moment, he gives up on his free will, although, if we return to fate again, yes, he might kill Macduff, but there's no way he's going to escape Malcolm's army. But in giving up his free will when he fights Macduff, it makes it inevitable now that Macduff is the man who's going to kill him. And then my final analysis of fate is when Macbeth has this vision provided by Hecate and the witches' masters, when he sees the vision of Banquo and then Banquo's sons reflected in mirrors until the crack of doom. Doom here is doomsday, meaning the final day of judgment. Here, Shakespeare is suggesting that King James, as a descendant of Banquo, will have a line that descends all the way into eternity almost, until the human race is judged by God and everyone either goes to heaven or to hell. That's doomsday for you. This is obviously over-exaggeration. It's obviously hyperbole. And here, again, we can hear Shakespeare having a bit of an argument, if you like, or an ironic smile, because there's no way he would expect us to believe that King James's descendants are going to reign all that time. And he can't even expect King James to believe that. Why? Well, because he's got the whole of history up until 1607 to look back on, and there's no period in history where royal families have lasted more than a few hundred years. So this is obviously an illusion. It's a description of fate, but actually we know that all kinds of free will get in the way of that, and it simply won't happen. However, King James would obviously appreciate the sentiment and appreciate the flattery, and also appreciate the message to his audience that his reign is going to be around for a long time. It doesn't have to go on until doomsday. It just has to last until King James dies a natural death in his bed with his heirs ready to carry on as king. So we can finish this video by returning to the idea again of the three fates, which I told you came from Greek mythology and then carried on through Roman mythology, which came later, and then Norse mythology, which came later still. And your job is to ask yourself how far Shakespeare himself believed in the power of the fates, how he was linking the three weird sisters of the play to the weird sisters of the fates, and whether in fact he himself would ridicule this idea as antiquated and outdated and a pagan idea with no place in a modern Christian society, or how far he believed that one's destiny was controlled, as Macbeth's appears to be, even though when we analyse it more closely, we can equally say that he is responsible for all his own actions, and that if he'd just left things to chance, he might well have led a peaceful life as king, a happy life, enjoying all the advantages that he hoped kingship would bring, rather than those which did occur as a result of his own free will. So I hope you enjoyed that analysis of the fates, and if you didn't, thank you very much for sticking it out anyway. Good luck with your revision, and see you soon on my channel, I hope.